Welcome to this public forum for the State Senate race for District 1 of Tennessee, a new number for Bradley County, Ray County, Meigs County, McMinn County. It is the goal of the Cleveland Lions Club and the Bradley County Bar Association to provide information to you which will allow you to cast a more informed vote as to the positions of the candidates and the issues which confront our state and our local area, because our state is our community is an important part of this state. We'd like to thank Serenity Funeral Home for sponsoring this event tonight. In addition to that, certainly we appreciate WCLE and their continuing desire to provide information to our area through their broadcast, through their retention of information through YouTube. This will be available if you'll tell your friends and neighbors, hey, I heard what the positions are regarding and the issues concerning our area. We would like to also thank the people who participate with us tonight. We have Diane Calfee of the Cleveland Lions Club, who will be keeping the time, and so there will be time limits to the presentation. Let me just outline the format that we have. Each candidate will be given an opportunity to introduce themselves and identify the major issue which they confront regarding the office which they are seeking. Thereafter, the moderator, I will ask questions which have been presented by the Bradley County public and those in surrounding areas. I must tell each of you that I am greatly disappointed in the fact that this is the fewest questions which have ever been submitted, and we've been doing this since 1971 when we had off-year elections for the city of Cleveland. It's a long time for that to have been done. Thereafter, after the introduction and your identification of the major issue, we will allow the other candidate to speak to the issue which you might raise. The answers to the questions which will then be asked of you, you will each have 1 minute within which to make an initial response, and the responsive party will be able to give 1 minute. In addition to that, we will, in the moderator's discretion, allow the other candidate to further comment regarding presentations which had been made by the first answering party. Thereafter, we will continue to ask those questions. We will be taking a break at some point, as provided by the director, for a giving of the interest of the support for this program tonight. Now, the Cleveland Lions Club and the Bradley County Bar Associations, as you know, are a civic organization with a long history of service to our community and to the professional organization of the Bradley County Bar Association. These are nonpartisan organizations with folks from different persuasions. I say sometimes that I think many of the members may even be mugwumps. So there is a nonpartisan effort to provide the best information possible to our voting public. And I know that each of you hope that we have informed voters, and thank you for your participation today to provide your positions and your identification of the issues which will confront you if you are elected to serve as the first District 1 from Bradley County and our surrounding counties to be that. So you are the first District 1 representatives involving our local area. One of the things that we have done over the years is the moderator will be able to exercise a question back to you. If you said that you thought that the color was unavailable to us, I might ask you, do you know of a way that we could find how to identify that color? In other words, I want you to answer the questions which are proposed to you. So if you haven't answered the question, the moderator may ask you to further identify the response which you would give. At the end of the session tonight, each candidate will be given an opportunity to make closing remarks. And we are going to tonight allow you a minute and a half to give your closing remark. I have made a decision with reference to who will be the first candidate tonight. And again, I know you appreciate the people I've expressed appreciation to for participating in providing this information. Some of the questions tonight are going to be repetitive of the state house race earlier, because you will be working together with our state representatives from our area regarding that. All right. The candidate who will speak first tonight will be Mr. Adam Lowe, and the other candidate is, to his immediate right, is Ms. Patricia Waters. So, Mr. Lowe, please introduce yourself to those who do not know you, and I know that you recognize that people can come back if they will share the fact that this will be available for their review through the YouTube presentation. So, Mr. Lowe, introduce yourself to those who do not know you, and if you will, please tell us what you believe the most important issue which you will confront if you're elected.
Absolutely. I'm Adam Lowe, and I am a resident of McMinn County, but most of the people know me from my time on the County Commission in Bradley County, Tennessee, where I served as Vice Chairman, Chairman of Education, on the Finance Committee, Law Enforcement, and Emergency Services Committees. I also own businesses. I've been somewhat of an entrepreneur throughout my life, but my career has always been geared into the field of education. Was the director of the Cleveland State Community College Foundation for a number of years, where we built numerous workforce and scholarship programs here in Southeast Tennessee. And most recently, I have been a professor of public policy for a number of universities online. I design those courses, I maintain oversight over several professors in that arena, and we work with people who need distance education. Many of those are deployed military, first responders who have to work remotely, and I've thoroughly enjoyed that. I'm married to Rachel Lowe, who is the vice principal of one of our local high schools. She's been there for 15 years, former school counselor. We have 4 beautiful children in our public school system at various levels, from elementary all the way up to high school. In fact, I'm about to send one off to college. So that's going to be an interesting process. My wife and I have been ingrained in this community for some time. We believe in the action of our hands, not just the words of our mouth. And we've tried to live that over the past 20 years in this community. The biggest issue I think that we face is that action continuing in Nashville. We have seen Tennessee grow and prosper in recent years under solid conservative leadership. And we need that continuity that Mike Bell brought when he was senator for the 9th District, in serving both the values of the district and the pragmatism that conservative politics brings to government. It's made us the most economically prosperous state in the Union. People are moving here because they want what we have. So thank you. I am Adam Lowe for State Senate, and I'd appreciate your vote on November 8th.
Thank you, Mr. Lowe. Ms. Patricia Waters, would you introduce yourself to the listening public and to the people they will be talking to?
All right. My name is Patricia Waters. I'm originally from Nashville. I was born and reared there. My parents were in the Tennessee Department of Employment Security. My mother worked at the local office. She went back to work. My father, they were both veterans of World War II, and my father was diagnosed with tuberculosis when I was about 4 and had to go into a sanatorium. And she went back to work. I had the only mother on the block who worked. And growing up with her example, her steadfastness, my father's care and commitment to us, our family, all of our family lived in Middle Tennessee. My mother's from up on the plateau. I'm a product of the public schools, went to public universities. I dedicated my career to teaching. I have taught middle school, high school, junior college, college, university, graduate programs, undergraduate programs. I spent the last roughly 10 years of my life supervising secondary English education program. And I really love being in the classroom. I like what student education is, nurturing those interns, nurturing those children in the classroom. My biggest concern is for public education in our state. And I feel like we need to look very closely at the path we have taken over the last 4 years and reconsider some of the policies and programs and laws that have been enacted. Thank you. I look forward to meeting you and talking to you about public education and where our state can go.
Thank you, Ms. Waters. It does appear that education is on the top of the minds of everyone, and each of you have addressed that issue. And I'd like to ask you, Ms. Waters, we have been under funding system, which is now proposed to be changed, has been passed as part of the legislature insofar as funding issues. The allocations of some of those things are still open. Have you reviewed the new plan of the state of Tennessee with reference to the basic funding principle that is applicable across the state?
Well, let's put it this way. I dove into the TISA funding law and I came out immersed in a lot of arcane language and also obfuscation. What I found was the first 4 years are pretty straightforward. It replaced the BEP based on school buildings, school districts, and it created a kind of what you might call a backpack model where each student was given a funding level, and then the first 4 segments of TISA are pretty clear in terms of what the General Assembly is responsible for, but then there are about 6 other levels of funding that can be varied over time.
Let me extend your time because I do think this is such an important issue, and we'll give you the same privilege. Can you tell me what changes you think should be reconsidered, if any, and the differences as you understand them from BEP and the new TSIS program?
I don't think we should commodify students. I don't think we should place a funding backpack on each student's head and have variables according to whether they are in special education or language learning. I think students need to be situated in districts and in school LEAs, if you will. What I'm seeing is by commodifying individual students, we're making them portable, and we're making their funding portable to charter schools, and we're making their funding portable vis-a-vis to vouchers, and we're undermining our public school system by making the funding portable to these other entities.
Thank you very much. Of course, the first part of the question dealt with the issue of education, and thank you for your comments. Could you respond, please, to the question of what do we do to enhance education, and tell us your view of the TSIS versus the basic education plan?
Well, BEP ultimately it's like flying a fighter jet. It had all these little knobs and switches, and many of them were irrelevant to the students in the chairs. The attempt of TISA has been to attach funding to the child, that the funding follows the child, the needs of the child. If you have a child with special needs, you're going to see a greater degree of funding. Students from low socioeconomic backgrounds are going to see a greater degree of funding that they have access to. And therefore, the schools that are serving those populations of greater need actually have an opportunity to see some funding to support those programs. That's the spirit of it. Will it take some tinkering? Yeah. You know, oftentimes what we don't do in public policy is evaluate quickly. So I think we'll be doing that with TISA in the next few years. But that really is the intent. I think it's a little bit of fear-mongering to say this is an attempt to completely undermine public education. To the contrary, it's an attempt to really start meeting the specific needs of students in our classrooms.
Thank you very much for your response. And now I'm going to continue the education issue for one other question. And obviously some of our teachers and people who are involved in education have submitted some of the questions. So Mr. Lowe, in terms of this mechanism that we have, people talk about charter schools, and as you know, it has been proposed that we have as many as 100 different charter schools to be built and maintained. A lot of folks say a charter school, that's going to be something that is not a public school. If you will, describe to me your perspective of the development of a charter school system throughout the state, and touched with that, of course, is the great controversy of whether or not the gentleman who does not think that trained educators and people who graduate from education with education degrees are necessary. Would you comment on that?
Well, I long for the day we can actually discuss the merits of charter schools without all the partisan coloring that's messed it up. It's a complete misnomer that charter schools are not public. Charter schools are public schools. The premise, the simple idea behind a charter school is a public school is allowed to do something different than the norm across the state. That they can create a charter initiative that does things in a different, innovative model. It can create an environment where we're really incubating great ideas in education, if done correctly. Now, ideally, a charter school should have a lot of buy-in at the local level, address very local, nuanced issues, rendering more local control in those decisions would help with that. So as we talk about charters, first, this again, the misnomer that it's siphoning money out of public schools is just not true. If anything, it's redirecting within that umbrella, but it's still within that camp.
All right. Ms. Waters, charter schools, and I noted that I didn't get any response to the individual who seeks to
You didn't
direct
extend my
those.
time.
Okay. Well, I guess
You want to extend my time? I'll answer that.
Well,
Yeah.
we
I'll gladly
may
answer that.
go
Okay.
back to that, because there are other issues that educators have asked about, and those have been the source of the few questions which have been presented. Well, tell us about charter schools, your perspective of that, and the perspective of who is it that's going to guide the direction of the charter schools in our state.
The direction of charter schools in our state is by a board appointed by the governor, and none of these people on this board have spent a day in the public school classroom. None of these people are trained teachers. None of these people really have a background in education. I think there's one fella who has a wonderful degree from Harvard, if I remember correctly, and who worked for the Chicago City school system at some point before he went over to charters. So the charter school board, which is called a public charter school board, has nothing to do with the public. It is appointed by a governor. It has no responsibility to the citizens of the state. And by the way, the chair is Mr. Tom Griscom, who was the comms director for President Reagan, and then went to K Street, and then directed the anti-science, anti-medicine campaign for R.J. Reynolds and big cigarette tobacco companies for 10 years. So he has a background in, shall we say, misleading the public.
Mr. Lowe, that's an interesting comment, so I'm going to ask you, if you will, to take 30 seconds at least to respond to the position espoused by Ms. Waters.
Oh, I'd love nothing more than charter schools to be incubated, developed, and generated from local school boards up. I really would. And I'd love, for our state committee to have more educators on them, more public school teachers. I understand Dr. Waters has an objection to the people involved with charter schools. I'm still explaining what charter schools can be. The people come and go, and ultimately the governor's responsible to the people. We elect him to spearhead initiatives in our state, including overseeing this monolith of the funding formula, which is public education. But at the end of the day, the governor's responsible to the people. He's put forth an initiative in how he wants to do charter schools. Again, we can always look at evaluating and how we can make things better. As a senator, that's something you'll see from me in Nashville, both in the ear of the governor, this board, or whomever else I'm working with, is if we don't have enough expertise from the classroom at the table, how do we get it there?
Well, since your response does say, and I'll allow you to comment, that you acknowledge the validity as I'm hearing you, and I want to make certain.
Acknowledge the
as
concern.
The concern,
Yeah.
but the statement that we don't have educators participating, is there something that we could do in the state senate or in the state house to perhaps set some qualifications or standards for the appointments to such a commission or committee?
Sure. That's
Should
the nice
be.
thing about charter schools is we're not handcuffed to the traditional ideas of public education, including how that board and how that governance is structured. So there's a lot of freedom to be innovative if we use it correctly. That's what I want us to do going forward in the coming years. Is I want to make sure we're using opportunities to incubate ideas relative to education, public education, access for our children, accommodation for our children, and that we're doing it under the spirit of trying to come up with ideas on the back end, what's coming out of the machine. That's the best possible product that we can have.
I just want to clarify
Sure.
what your position was. You did suggest that we needed the involvement, or that you believe that we should have
Said I would
greater
love to
involvement.
Yeah,
Yes.
I would. Yeah, I think you need to have diversity of perspective at any table, and I would always encourage that.
All right. Now, the other issue that was raised by people who communicated concerns about education dealt with a comparative analysis of the product of education between other countries and what has become our country's method of providing education. As I understand it, there's a concept of attitude and aptitude that's out there, and we now have lowered passing grades to 60 from 70. What is your perspective of other countries having circumstances where aptitude development results in what educational opportunities are great? Folks with IQs over 150 may need to accelerate and not stay with the folks who are special needs, for example. Please comment, Dr. Waters, on that issue of our comparative development of an education system as opposed to Germany, China, Japan, and other very progressive people whom we look to for a lot of input into where we're going as a world. Dr. Waters.
When you speak of international education, I'm assuming you're referring to the data that is collected by the PISA scores. The PISA scores are very interesting. Holistically, the United States does not perform all that well in comparison to the other G8 countries. However, when you disaggregate for poverty, you find that American students are as high performing and as intellectually challenged and challenging as any student in any European country. So what we have to do is address the social and economic disparities that exist in our country and therefore raise all boats. We are public schools. We are a democracy. We educate all our students, not just the elite. Our public schools are responsive. Our public schools are innovative. They have to be funded. Teachers have to be paid. We have to give them the respect they are due.
Mr. Adams Lowe, would you please tell
Sure.
us your perspective of attitude, aptitude, and trying to ascertain at an earlier age which tracks of learning that we would have?
Well, oftentimes when we're cross-compared to other countries, we tend to we're judging our whole population against someone else's elite population, and it's not a true comparison, and Dr. Waters kind of yielded to that. We include the less fortunate, the less advantaged among us when we evaluate our educational systems. Now, there has been policy moves in education that compress to the middle. We have one of the best mediocrity systems in the world, but we have stifled excellence in the past 30 years in education. We've done it under banners that are really, are well-intentioned, like inclusive learning and things like that. But what we've done is we've not allowed those with the aptitude to excel to truly excel. And this has driven a lot of the dissatisfaction that's motivated the school choice debate, is people who have children who are excellent and want to see them maximize their potential are wanting to seek out opportunities. My time's done. That's all as far as I can go.
I'm going to suggest that each of you have hit the nail on the head as to the most pressing issue that we have. Your desires to maybe make things a little different, but maintain that system. I think that the public would be respectful of your positions with reference to those approaches, but that's not for me to judge. The next issue, and regarding what the legislature confronts, is absolutely, without question, one of the most important things. Crime is an issue in our state. And we had like 3 or 4 questions earlier this year in the state representative's race, and people calling my office saying, can you get them to tell us what we're going to need to do to make things better? I'm unilaterally going to extend the time for response to 2 minutes on this issue. And I have some issues, some public statements that you've heard about. Staffing and placement capacities have plagued DCS for years through stakeholders in the juvenile justice system. You might get some insight into who may have submitted this information in the question. In recent months, these problems have been brought more to the fore because many people think that juvenile justice is perhaps more significant as a factor to be raised, because it does appear that many of the people who are convicted of crimes at the adult level have juvenile records, and our legislature says that the sentencing courts and criminal courts should consider juvenile records in making a sentence. Judge Irwin, who's really a widely respected juvenile judge out of Knoxville, and Judge Sheila Galloway, a juvenile justice in Davidson County, has told lawmakers that what we need to do more from the beginning. Our juvenile justice system has collapsed. Judge Irwin said specifically that though the juvenile justice system is near collapse, it's an absolute failure. Mr. Lowe, if you would please give response to the question of what are we going to do about crime, violent crime, and the involvement of very young people and juveniles in the commissions of those crimes.
Anytime you talk about crime, especially juvenile crime, you have the symptom and then you have the problem, right? A lot of times what our justice system contends with is the symptom of greater problems, right? We've seen policies, in the past debates you talked about community corrections, how we do things like that. When you talk to law enforcement, they will tell you they don't have enough teeth to follow through when people enter systems, whether it's the adult or juvenile systems, especially those in those entry-level spaces where reform is probably the most likely. They struggle in those capacities. But let's take, a lot of this goes back to the fact we have a societal problem both in the home and in our culture that has led to a lot of this too. We can continue to address the symptom, but if we never get back to the fact that we have taken steps that have undermined family for a long time, that we're still seeing a very prevalent fatherless and motherless culture in a lot of ways, We're seeing absentee parenting in some capacities. We're seeing parenting by proxy. And those are things that really matter in the development of a child. Some of that's been outsourced to schools. And schools aren't in a capacity to do juvenile justice and education, but we have outsourced that to schools to a great degree. And then you couple that with an influx of people who end up in the juvenile justice system and then into the adult system, and then recidivism becomes an issue, and then we crowd our jails. It becomes systemic. So I would hope that we start to cycle back, both as we address the symptoms with juvenile justice and what we do. And that's really a question for the DA's conference and the public defender's conference and the judges at hand on what they're seeing on the ground that we should be able to fix. But at the same time, let's not forget the things like the Boys and Girls Clubs, the other agencies and nonprofits that are out there doing their best to provide mentorship, direction, and opportunity to juveniles so they know there's something better ahead than a cycle in and out of jail.
Ms. Waters, if you would respond, I think that we all kind of know that these two judges at the juvenile system, that their positions have been are prevalent throughout who the judges are and the people who deal with that from the public defender's office as well as the DA's office. Do you have any specific thoughts about whether or not we do need to fund the Department of Children's Services at a greater level and the funding of the juvenile justice programs which we have? Can you please respond to that basic question? Our juvenile justice system appears to be a failure.
I'm familiar with Judge Irwin's remarks and his rulings and the extended commentary that he has made. Judge Irwin has made it clear that what we have failed are the children. We have not hired the people for DCS. We have not hired the people that we need. They're sleeping in offices in the building in Nashville. And when the time is up for their sleeping in one particular office, they're gotten and moved to another particular office to sleep. It is unconscionable that we treat children like furniture rather than try to meet their needs. And we do have a model in the school to help children. It's called the Community School. We have one in Knoxville. It's called Pond Gap School. We have another one in Sunbright, Tennessee. We know that if we put the resources into community schools that respond to the needs of the parents and the children, we know we cut down bad behavior, we cut down recidivism, we know we uplift all children, and we create relationships between the families and the schools. So the families are not alienated from the schools. They are a part of the schools. There are community gardens, community kitchens. At Pond Gap, they even had a course in tail light repair because so many people were getting pulled over because of tail lights. So they had a response to a need in the community so the parents could go to work and take care of their children. Parents want to take care of their children. Parents love their children. They want the best for them. And sometimes they just need help. And speaking of European counterparts, well, it's not just the elites. In Germany and in France, families are given stipends to help out when they have children. They're given support so they can know that they can nourish their children, that their children won't be hungry. 1 in 5 of our children are hungry.
The issue regarding the state mandated grading system, we did not address. I don't think, maybe my question was inadequate. Give me 30 seconds as to whether or not, Ms. Waters, you would continue to support the mandatory reduction of our grades of our children in school.
Are you saying 60 as passing?
60 is passing, yes, ma'am.
60 as passing.
And maybe you're unaware of the fact that we do have a new grading system mandated.
I've heard about it. It'll be interesting to see the implementation because teachers have a great deal of leeway in the classroom into how they assess a child. And it may not be based on a strict numeric correspondence. It may be based on a holistic approach in terms of a larger letter. And quite frankly, humiliation in terms of failing grades, it really doesn't work, So teachers know how to address the needs of a child without humiliating the child. If the student doesn't do the work, cut and dried, but you have to help the student to want to do the work.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lowe.
Some of these grading issues have been around for a while. There was a move, and still prevalent in some circles, about going to pass-fail. Either you have the competency or you don't. These grades are arbitrary.
Yeah.
The teachers are going to assess them. They're going to put them in place. I equate it to a speed limit on the highway. When it's 55, everybody drives 60. If you raise it to 70, everybody's going to drive 75. To some degree, the behavior and how teachers evaluate will adjust in and out of a classroom, because I think most teachers know which students are capable of progressing to the next grade. They have a good bead on their classroom, which students are mastering the material enough to move on to the next level. And then the grades tend to reflect that. There's a lot of discretion in that space for a teacher.
I don't want to leave this, but my question is, the school boards, many of the school boards do not think that the reduction of learning is the grade level achieved. Certainly the teacher assesses. Is there a way that we can assess the learning of children without involving the teachers in the body of their responses?
No, well, you're trying to quantify, qualify, a quality-based assessment. Teachers are gauging whether or not a student's ready, whether or not a student understands.
Irrespective of the grade.
Irrespective of the grade. And if that passing grade's a 75 and that student is mastering their content, they're going to get that passing grade from most teachers, whether you move that mark up or down. I think what you're seeing is an attempt to bureaucratically, from policymakers, manipulate what's happening in the classroom, just one more thing. And it really is it's unnecessary at the end of the day. I don't know if it's going to make an impact.
Any additional comment?
Teachers in classrooms and students, they're fabulous. They know exactly how to do workarounds to make a child commit to producing work that shows what the child can do and can know. The interesting thing, of course, is that the grade is ultimately irrelevant. It is what the child performs and then has the ability to express that counts.
Thank you. We're going to stop the education issues at this point and move back to the issue of crime in the adult system based upon some things which are occurring. So we're going to take a brief intermission and then we will be back in approximately 30 seconds to a minute.
Serenity Funeral Homes. Convenient, caring, affordable. Cleveland's most affordable funeral home. Completely remodeled. Offering cremations as low as $5.95. Funerals, $15.95. SerenityofCleveland.com. When trust matters most.
Welcome back to the public forum, which is being participated in by each of the candidates for the new state Senate district. I want to suggest to you, if you have been listening, you are learning a lot about some of the issues, I hope. And as a result of that, I'd ask you to call a friend, tell them, hey, tune in to WCLE and listen to the public forum that is being presented tonight. And again, I want to express our appreciation to WCLE for hosting and providing this opportunity for the public to know the position of each of you. Now, the issues regarding the expenses of the operation of government, somebody did resubmit a variation of the question which was asked of state representatives. A proposal which was first introduced by Winfield Dunn of the fact that we are operating an inefficient local government in which there would be combinations of some of the existing offices. He had suggested Register of Deeds, Assessor of Property, because the actual assessment is made based on state standards as opposed to local standards, and also the combination of that with the office of trustee. He was met with resounding oppositions by powerful local politicians who had served as trustees and those types of things. Is it time for the legislature to begin considering possibly bringing our local government into the 19th century, the 20th century, and the 21st century? Because in the 20th century, you may remember that we made Register of Deeds and all of those offices constitutional offices. So what a change it would be if the people had the opportunity to run the cost of government sort of like a business, so that we can provide those funds that are generated or saved. Somebody said it cost like $4,000 or $5,000 a year for the toilet paper, and that might be cut in half. But irrespective of that, what's your perspective of whether we should consider modernizing local government? And Mr. Lowe, I'd ask you to respond first.
Objection. Yeah, question's leading. Okay. Mr. Esquire.
The question is, let me make sure of this.
Okay.
Is it true that businesses have utilized the new developing technology to operate their businesses at less cost?
Yeah, I think you've kind of posited two things here. Number one, integration of technology, more efficient systems in government. I think all governments are looking at doing that in some capacity, at least the ones I know of. Our local counties, our local cities are all looking to find ways to be more efficient, how to reduce the burden on staffing. So I don't think there's a resistance to that. But you kind of led with the whole metro government suggestion, where we integrate government. And I remind people quite often that there's constitutional offices in government that happens in counties, but our local municipalities exist at their own volition. They choose to. A body of citizens choose to get together, pay more taxes for more services, for a different police department and all of those services. A community at any given moment, without any direction from the legislature, could decide whether under a county charter effectively, or to just do away with some services at the city level, to consolidate services at a local level. They could do that. We saw that happen in Chattanooga with school systems years ago. So I don't necessarily think action by the legislature is paramount for that to occur. It's up to the local communities.
So the state mandated means of registering a deed and then transmitting that same information to the Assessor of Property's office and transmitting that same information to the County Trustee's office, you think that that's a community decision to make and we ought to violate the Tennessee Constitution as it now stands?
No.
I wasn't discussing
the existence of duality in a community where you have a city planner and a county planner.
That's not the question.
Okay, that's where, when you initially said, that's where I thought you were going with
I'm talking
consolidation of
about
services.
giving an option to run local government in a way and manner which saves local government monies, which you can't do with the present Constitution in terms of the Register of Deeds, the Assessors of Property, the county trustees.
I understand.
Yeah, now that's the question. Should the legislature look at giving local governments an option to not be metropolitan, not be 5 cities inside of one county, and not metropolitan, but looking at merely the operation of state mandated government. Should the legislature offer an additional means of adoption of the operation of local government?
I'll clarify quickly so Dr. Waters can answer. Possibly, if it's something local communities say that they want. Now, we've seen with financial acts of like 1981, some of that tinkered with a little bit on the financial side for local governments. But the question is this something local communities desire, or is this something that's being forced upon them? As a senator, I'd be willing to listen to local communities to see if they're wanting to consolidate some of those offices for more efficiency.
The potential adoption of an alternative form of government, we have the potential metropolitan, we have the system which we now have generally even across the state, which can't be impacted even in metropolitan governments. Dr. Waters, should the legislature begin to develop potential alternative forms of government as a change in our Constitution?
Well, are you talking chicken and egg? Are you going to change the Constitution first before you can initiate? Or can you run pilot programs in communities so to test the viability? You know, local people really like their local government, and they like that face-to-face interaction. And if the state can offer a model that's interactive, what's the most hated office in a county? The DMV. It drives people crazy, drives people nuts. They can't stand it. But it's our state at work in our local community. People like to go to the courthouse and meet their assessor or meet their county trustee. So-and-so's on my land, da 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 da. I don't think they're going to get that out of a state model, but I'd like to see what the state thinks it can produce to save money. A lot of times people aren't rational about things like that. They want that human contact. Money won't mean that much unless they can actually see it cut down on their taxes.
All right.
And government's a people business. Let's not forget that.
Yeah.
I'm hearing you say, even to the extent that local people might elect a different form of government is nothing we should consider.
I don't think I heard
No,
that.
it's not. No,
Okay,
that's
but we have constitutional protections of
Right.
those offices,
Right.
even though, how
Right.
many times do people actually take the deed to the courthouse when they financed a new home?
right.
How many people really know, other than the personal relationships, and I'm not arguing for anything other than what
Right.
Winfield Dunn initially suggested,
Yeah.
and we decided not to do that. But that's the question. Do you have any further response?
I think in the scale of what we're facing as a state, I don't know that question's on the local person's mind, Jimmy. I really don't. I think that's it.
Efficiency
I think
in
there has to be
government is
some
not-
desire. Well, no.
I'm not going to debate with
Yeah,
you.
no, I think there has to be some desire from a local community to want something different. And as Dr. Waters alluded to, right now, there's a lot of comfort with the person contact that people need in the governmental space. And until we see that shift, you're probably just not going to see a lot of stress on the legislature to do a thing.
One of the great concerns, still to some extent a part of the criminal justice system, is mental health issues have become overwhelming. My impression is that we have approximately 1/3 of the prison population, the jail population at Bradley County. And the state doesn't want to transfer to the state penitentiaries because we do not have specific facilities available for the treatment of mentally ill prisoners. Would you comment on whether or not, please, you think that we have to take into consideration treatment facilities for mental health in jails and prisons? Dr. Waters.
I remember in the 1970s, early 1970s, when under federal law, we disbanded our mental health hospitals, Central State in Nashville. I know that had a tremendous impact on our community, and suddenly families were kind of thrust into an arena of care they knew nothing about. And there was no real infrastructure in the state on a clinical basis to take care of mental health issues. So if you don't have mental health clinics taking care of people who are not, criminality is another issue altogether, but we know if people aren't trained, people with mental health issues are suffering and going to jail for their mental health issues, not because of any kind of crime they've committed. Look at the suffering.
Mr. Lowe, big issue, isn't it?
Yeah.
And education knows that, as well as other governmental entities. What do we do about the mental health crisis in our state and across the country?
I think that's yet to be determined. The only thing we can do right now is take those who seem to know best on the ground and try to get them into one space to see what's working and what's not. There's some great agencies out there who are working with those with both mental impairment and psychiatric disorders, trying to address both homeless populations and this trend that families aren't providing family care. I mean, we know that families are putting people out on the street. And they end up in the criminal justice system, not because they're aware of committing a crime, but just for the circumstance that leads them into that space. Because it tends to be the roof and the meal that they have at the end of the day. And like you alluded to, our corrections officers, which we're stressed to have anyway, aren't prepared to meet the needs and the mental health needs. So I know it's time we do something. And I know it's time that we take that problem seriously. But there are people who are making monumental gains in that arena. We've just got to get them to the table and figure out how the state might be able to help.
Thank you very much. We're nearing the end of our time that we're going to be here, and I want to thank each of you for your responses to date. Somewhat unique to Bradley County, but I understand it exists at other places. Fascinating question. Why is the county responsible for the cost of elections and cannot control the spending of election commissions appointed by the state based on party affiliations in this state? Can you tell me, Mr. Lowe, you know what we're talking about here, because the Election Commission in Bradley County's funding has been significantly less than what was budgeted, but nobody seems to do anything about it. And the citizens, I think, as I know the county commissioners believe, that folk ought to abide by their budgets. What's your perspective with reference to why the county is responsible for the cost of elections and cannot control the spending of the Election Commission?
Well, it seems that the county can control the spending of the Election Commission. I mean, that's part of what we're dealing with in Bradley County. They've given them a budget and they're telling them to operate within those parameters. I don't know, what's the alternative suggestion? For the state to take on the onus directly, remove the counties completely from that budget? And if that's the case, how do you bring something uniformly about? What does that transition look like? It's a good segue into the fact that we're in a season of questions about election integrity. And whether you believe there are issues of election integrity in the state of Tennessee, the confidence of voters is low. Whether it's real or not, people need confidence in our electoral system. The Election Commission in certain counties are always going to say voting is part of the due process of everything that we do. We're kind of resigned to what we have to do to make the elections happen. I think this just goes back to good personal relationships between an election commission and a county commission, and figuring out how to work out those problems on a local level without having to just uproot the system and start anew.
Well, if we're going to have that issue of the cost, why is the county responsible for the cost and cannot control except by a budget which they do not follow according to the county commission and the county mayor? Should this not be something that is administratively handled by the state of Tennessee?
Well, the state of Tennessee, in its infinite wisdom, many years ago, put that onus on the county simply because in a county you can have any number of incorporated areas that do indeed have a staff, a paid staff, a paid policeman, a paid librarian, a paid mayor. So local entities, little old Calhoun, little old Nyota, They have their own little election, and it costs money. If you really want to be rational about it and save money, just make all elections mail-in. That'd be the easiest thing to do. But Tennessee is stubborn. We want to show up on election day and show up with our neighbors and vote. That's the way we are. But it is local because the state has mandated it such.
Well, let me ask each of you, we now have early voting.
Yes.
And we have learned now that more than 50% of the people participate in early voting. So I don't think any of you would intend to reduce the
No.
early voting, would you?
No.
But it has created more expense for an election commission.
yeah.
It is correct. And that's part of the problem as things have grown. Again, a local community just, I think a lot of these problems can be solved on the ground. We don't often have to bring Big Brother into a situation to clean up the mess, whether at the state or the federal level. I have full confidence that eventually working through this, our local elected leaders are going to meet the needs of the election commission.
You know, the question that received the most comment from the state representatives was the question which was posed and request. Ms. Waters, would you say the nicest things you know about Mr. Lowe?
He loves his family. His family loves him. They are genuinely a loving group of people. And they've given a lot to their community.
Mr. Lowe, you considered whether or not we should invite Ms. Waters, and you were willing for her to participate in the debate earlier this year, not debate, the public forum. Tell me the nicest things you know about Ms. Waters.
Man, I admire your track record with education, the commitment that you've really focused. I think behind all of what you've espoused is a genuine concern for children. We may disagree on how to get to the final goal, but I think your heart's in the right place, and I can see it in moments bubbling up through. And I think anybody who has a passion for kids, you know, my grandfather used to say, people that don't like kids, I don't trust, right? And so I think anybody who's got a passion for children in whatever capacity, that's a beautiful thing. So never lose it.
All right. Well, he got to go first in the introductory comments, and if you would please tell us what your perspectives are in the way and manner in which you desire to do, and make your concluding remarks to the voters of the 1st District for State Senate in the state of Tennessee.
Okay, where's my camera? Right here. I believe the public schools are the bedrock of our democracy. Charter schools are not public schools. They're not answerable to the public. They're run privately. They can kick out children anytime without cause. They do not have to serve children with special needs. They're not answerable to anybody. Your public school is answerable to you. You have an elected school board. This is democracy, hands down, at the most local level. You can go to that school board meeting and make your voice heard. That's not going to happen with the charter school. What I'm saying is that we need to invest in our public schools. Show our teachers we respect them by paying them the professional salaries they deserve. Have our librarians do their job because they're trained, not some goober in a cowboy hat who comes to the General Assembly and makes aspersions on librarians. We know children want to read. What do we know? Children want to learn. They are ready to learn. Let's give them a place where they can learn, where they can be sustained with respect, with love. And we know we can do that in our Tennessee public schools. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lowe.
Sure. So I'm the son of a painter that never graduated high school, and a mother that worked at a VA hospital and worked her way up to be a nurse. And my parents knew that education was a way out of poverty. And I went on to pursue the things that they set in me because they knew that if a family supported a child could do anything. And I went on to get my doctorate at the University of Tennessee and went on to be able to teach other people that same principle. And it's what we teach my children. Education's a big part of what we're going to deal with in the legislature. But regardless of charter schools or vouchers or any of that stuff that's going on, we're still dealing with an economic crisis in our nation of inflation. Just today, inflation's still outpacing what people anticipated. And we've done, since conservative leadership in Tennessee has taken over, we've done monumental things. Teacher pay has gone from the upper 30s on the average into $52,000 plus a year average pay for a teacher. Adjusted for inflation, that's a 10% increase across the board. And the sad part is a Biden economy has destroyed that 10% in a matter of 2 years through inflation. So many of our problems we're going to contend with going forward are going to be in the economic sector. And Tennessee has one of the strongest economies in the nation. We're outpacing all of our other states. Our GDP growth is 13.1%. The national average is 10%. People are flooding in here from other states because we have been doing things right. And even though there's room for growth and even though there's room for reform, progress has been made in the state of Tennessee. We're going to continue to make progress, but we're going to do it in arenas not only in education, but in healthcare, in community service, in juvenile justice, in good governance, and we're going to do it on the bedrock that my parents instilled in me as a painter and a little nurse. The education creates opportunities, but good families create great students. So let's keep our families strong in Tennessee. I'm Adam Lowe, and I ask for your vote in November.
I wondered which one of the candidates would be the first to ask for the vote, and I suspect that Ms. Waters would ratify and adopt that statement herself. But I want to thank each of you for your participation.
Thank you.
And for you having the intestinal fortitude, if you will, to run for public office
Yeah.
and espouse the views which you have. We are blessed as a community to have very qualified people who offer themselves, who have strong ideas about how we make this a better place every day. And the legislature has the power to make significant advancements by their review of the law and their enactment of statutes, which are calculated at achieving great things for Tennessee. Thank you again. Thank you to WCLE News. On behalf of the Cleveland Lions Club and the Bradley County Bar Association, let me ask you to cast an informed vote. Thank you and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.